there's this idea of the introject is fascinating to me, because what it says is that if you consume enough of that content, if you read enough books about people who have embarked on certain kinds of journeys and made certain choices, that at some point you might introject some of their personality and their responses and subconsciously start making decisions, hopefully positive decisions, on your own behalf, maybe having more appropriate boundaries, maybe taking better self-care or care of other people. And that without even realizing it, you're starting to make better choices on your own behalf. And then at some point, you move from the introject to a recognition that, wait, it was me that made that change. I'm the one that managed to get up a bit earlier and do a little bit more, or to be kinder in this context, or to listen a little bit better in this context. And over time, we start to ascribe those changes to ourselves. So this is a more gradual shift in personality and this story of who one is. But I think it's a powerful one. And I like it because we hear so much today about the negativity that's out there and how to navigate the just onslaught of negative news and negative interactions online. And for that reason, I really make an effort to really focus on the kind of the bright shining lights out there, because I do think that the information that we consume sets the internal context of our subconscious and sets the internal context for what we decide to do consciously. And in many ways, it's sort of like garbage in, garbage out. And if it's, positive stories and inspiration that's how you're basically going to react in the world. So I think that the nervous system has a tremendous capacity to learn consciously and subconsciously. The key here is be cautious. I would say be very cautious about stacking and layering in too many dopamine peak-inducing behaviors all at once on a regular basis. I would notice that I'd experience a real trough in energy. I just would not feel that good. And then if I kept up those behaviors consistently, and I was consistently adding in these other, let's just call them what they are, dopamine releasing or stimulating behaviors and substances, that my enthusiasm for physical training or running or for doing experiments actually started to diminish. And this was really discouraging to me at the time, because I started to think, okay, maybe I'm burnt out. Maybe I have adrenal burnout, which, by the way, doesn't exist, folks. Your adrenals don't burn out. There is something called adrenal insufficiency syndrome. You can overstimulate your system by way of too much adrenaline, epinephrine, and norepinephrine, but that's a separate thing. There's no such thing as adrenal burnout per se. But I didn't know that. So I thought, gosh, I'm really burnt out. When in fact, it's now obvious to me what I was doing. I was combining too many dopamine releasing or stimulating behaviors and substances for things that I already enjoyed doing as behaviors, namely exercise and doing experiments. Anything related to science, actually. So what this means is not to avoid taking things or doing things that amplify your amount of dopamine, but to be very cautious about how often one does that and how many different dopamine stimulating behaviors or compounds one stacks, especially in terms of taking those things or stacking those things in and around behaviors that you already really enjoy doing. I was essentially just creating another version of the kids in nursery school or first grade with the gold star experiment. I was basically just doing the exact same thing. And when I realized that, and I changed my relationship to those compounds, I didn't eliminate them altogether, but I started realizing, for instance, that I didn't need to double up on yerba mate and coffee every workout. Sometimes I would do one, sometimes I would do the other. Frankly, I always do one or the other. It's rare that I ever do any kind of physical training without some caffeine first, and I do my physical training typically in the early part of the day, so that's fine, doesn't interfere with my sleep. I might do a hike without caffeine, but if I'm in a weight trainer, I'm going to run, I tend to drink coffee beforehand or have yerba mate. Or if I occasionally, meaning about once every third, sometimes every other, but usually about every third workout, I'll take 300 milligrams of alpha GPC, maybe occasionally, maybe every third or fourth workout. And these are resistance workouts, mind you, not running. I'll take 500 milligrams of L-tyrosine, or more typically 500 milligrams of phenylethylamine. And very, very rarely, maybe once every 2 or 3 months, I might stack all of those things together prior to a workout. But of course, I'm always mindful to also include workouts or runs or bouts of cognitive work. So that could be grant writing, prepping for a podcast, etc., where I don't do anything prior. Maybe just my caffeine, because I have a baseline level of caffeine that I use each day to function like many people. The key point here is, if you are somebody that can engage in these intrinsically joyful activities for you, these activities that you're really motivated to do, whether or not it's skiing or playing music or dancing, etc., without the need to layer in additional dopamine releasing mechanisms or compounds or activities, well then I highly recommend you do that, because then you are essentially making yourself one of those fortunate few that does not require additional stimuli, and therefore can hold on to that pleasure, can hold on to that intrinsic pleasure and motivation to engage in these behaviors over time, which frankly, there is no replacement for. There is no pill or bottle or potion or motivational speech or podcast or book that can replace intrinsic motivation. So how can we overcome procrastination? Well, it turns out that there are findings from within the addiction literature that turn out to be very powerful towards leveraging our way out of procrastination. And it has to do with this. You already know, because I've told you probably a dozen times now, that the depth of the trough after a dopamine peak is proportional to how high that peak was and how steep it was, how quickly that peak occurred. It turns out that not only is the depth of the trough proportional to that, but the rate at which you get out of that trough is proportional to how steep that trough is. Let me explain this for you in as clear terms as I possibly can. Imagine you're in an amotivated state. You're just not feeling motivated. You're procrastinating. You may think, okay, the thing to do here is something. I'll clean the house. I'll take care of some bills. I'll do something. Or I'll just wait. Those approaches, as we talked about before, generally don't work, or at least don't work quickly. Or they lead you right up to the deadline, and that's the deadline that forces you to get something done. Or you just don't get it done and you don't succeed in your goal. That happens a lot as well. However, if you were to take that state of being unmotivated, of procrastinating, and actually do something that's harder than being in that amotivated state, in other words, doing something that's more effortful, even painful, you can rebound yourself out of that dopamine trough much more quickly. So what do I mean you want to put yourself in a state that's worse than or harder than the state that you're in, or do something quote unquote more painful? And here I want to be very clear. I'll say this 3 times, but I'm going to say it for the first time now. When I say more painful, I do not mean doing any kind of tissue damaging or psychologically damaging behavior or anything of that sort that's going to render you injured or not well, even in the short term. That's not what I'm referring to, okay? Let's just get that one out of the way. What I'm referring to is the fact that, for instance, if you're feeling amotivated, but you find yourself cleaning the house as a way to procrastinate, you could say, well, cleaning the house is harder than sitting down and doing nothing. But actually, in that moment or in those moments, that's not the case, or else you wouldn't be doing it. The reality is that the dopamine system works according to what feels hard or easy in the moment. In other words, if you're feeling amotivated, you need to do something and put yourself into a state that's harder than the state you're in. So for instance, if you're sitting around feeling amotivated, or you find yourself tending to tasks that are irrelevant to the goal that you really should be focused on, you need to put your body and mind into a state of discomfort quickly. And the way to do that is to either engage in some tangential activity, meaning an activity not related to your goal that puts your body into a very different state. So here again, I'll default to the obvious one, which is something like cold shower or cold immersion, which not only increases dopamine long-term, or over several hours rather, but for most people is experienced as pain. That pain causes a rebound out of that dopamine trough faster than it would occur if you had just stayed in that amotivated state and waited for it to go away, or done something like cleaning up that for whatever reason felt like it required less friction. When I say friction, I mean limbic friction. Your limbic system is always in this dialogue with your forebrain. And limbic friction goes 2 ways. Limbic friction can be you're tired and you don't want to do something, and so you have to quote unquote motivate to do it, energize yourself to do it. Or limbic friction can be that you're nervous and scared and anxious to do something, and you have to calm yourself in order to lean forward into action in order to do that thing despite the anxiety.